for the first 5 minutes will relate to you how whatever you have done is relevant. Okay, because you must be thinking that what is all this? It's not at all relevant, it's confusing. So why is it relevant? This is what I'm going to tell you, and I'm also going to tell you why is philosophy so confusing. So let me begin with the second question. Why is philosophy so confusing? It is so confusing because it is so close to your heart. Everybody has an opinion on philosophy. Why? Because it touches upon every aspect of your life. You can't speak on physics. If there is a physics seminar here, you will not have questions. You will all be listening very quietly, maybe this is right, this is wrong, yeah, but that's all you will do. You will not have your own opinions. Why? Because it is a very closed field. It's a very closed field. But when you are talking about philosophy, it envelopes everything that you can think of. Secondly, if you have noticed so far, our only sanction is reason. For example, now you have had sessions on law. Very clear-cut issue. Abortion is illegal, finished. That's it. You can't argue. It's illegal, you can't do it. Because the sanction that you appeal to is very different. It's a legal sanction. You are not appealing to reason. Even if you are irrational, you will be put behind bars. Even if you are rational, you will be put behind bars. There is a sanction over there. This sanction is external sanction. So most of the things that we do out of external sanctions. So according to the Constitution of India, the following things are legal. And according to the Constitution of India, the following things are illegal. Now you have to abide by them. You have to. Now why do you have to? Because there is an external force which ensures that you do it. Now in case of ethics, unfortunately, you cannot have an external force. The force is essentially internal. And what is that force? Your reason. And we all know how easily we can pack our reason behind. To give you an example, take my own example. My reason tells me smoking is bad. The first time I get up in the morning, I light a cigarette, I know that this is bad, but I smoke. I pushed reason behind. So this internal sanction of reason is the only sanction, is the only force behind ethical principles. That is why it is so confusing. If you are ready to be irrational, all this confusion will disappear. But if you choose to be rational, then as you have seen in the past sessions, it is a very difficult task. Forget about being ethical. Even to know what is ethical, it will be so confusing. Utilitarianism will not help you because it has its own sets of irrational problems. Problems which do not conform to rationality. You can't be deontological because, as you just saw, that will also lead to so many problems. So as an ethical principle, what do you do? Now one thing is to confuse legality with morality. So you say whatever is legal is moral. That is an escape route. That is an escape route. You don't want to think. So what do? You take an easy route and say whatever is legal is ethical, finished. Why? Because it is easy to decide what is legal. Because it does not appeal to the rationality of the entire mankind. It will appeal to maybe the members who are framing that law, or a few handful of people who are involved in it. That is why not every legal law satisfies everyone. It does not appeal. That's why you will always have problems pertaining to legal laws. Somebody will say, no, that should not have been the law. Now this is exactly what ethics tries to evade. It tries to evade this arbitrariness. It does not want to be not acceptable to any individual. It has to be acceptable to all individuals, and there is only one way of doing it. Appeal to reason. So reason becomes primary. Right? Now am I clear why what we are doing is so inconclusive? Whereas other fields you will see is very conclusive. Right? Now with this, I beg your pardon, but with this I would also like to draw your attention on the ethical codes that you have. Now you all have an ethical code, a practice of, your practice codes of ethics. Now that is so because it is coded. Decode it and see whether it really appeals to your reason. Now we will do that, I will do that. I have also told Professor Lobo that is my basic intention, to show you how they are so problematic and why you land up in problems while doing research or while formulating other principles from these basic principles. Why do you land up in problems? That is, if you decode it and make it purely rational, that is the only force of you accepting it is your reason, then you will see how difficult it is for you to accept all those things that you have been accepting as ethical. So that is what we will do in the last 2 sessions. But now coming to the first question that I raised earlier, how is it relevant? How is everything that we are doing connected together? Okay. Now I'll do this very simply by telling you that we have seen that there are various argument forms. The basic argument form is that of if then. So if X, then good. Now our problem over here is to find out what is good, what is morally good. So when will good be good? If X. Now the problem is, what is this X? What is it that makes something good? Now you have to understand one thing. We have seen that there are many kinds of if then, not only causal. There are 5 kinds, as there can be many more. But to instantiate, I have instantiated 5 kinds of if then for the sake of clarity, right? Now this cannot be definitional. It cannot be conventional. Why? Because if it is definitional and conventional, then again it becomes arbitrary. Anybody can come and change it. I can come and change the definition and it will not apply. If I go to some other convention, some other culture, it will not apply. So it cannot be definitional conventional. So it has to be either of these 2 kinds. Either it has to be logical, as is the case with Kant, as you just saw. Apply where? With the help of the reason of universalizability, which is a logical principle. So in Kant, if it is logical, then it is good. So if then becomes a logical principle in Kant. If X, what is this X? That which can be universalized. Now how do you know what is universalizable? That which does not self-contradict. It's a logical principle. It does not appeal, it does not tell you look outside into the empirical world. It is not appealing to any of your empirical experiences. It's merely focusing on reason and logic. If you have a principle that does not self-contradict, it is your duty. So it is X. So if it is X, then it is good. This is how Kant formulates it. Utilitarianism, on the other hand, does not like this. So it moves and takes resort to the other if then, that is law of nature if then, like science. Human beings, as we can all see, seek happiness. Therefore, they must be happiness-seeking creatures. Since it is their nature to seek happiness, therefore they should seek happiness. Therefore, that is good which maximizes happiness. So, what is X in utilitarianism? That which maximizes happiness. Now, this is not purely logical. This is empirical. My experience tells me that human beings are pleasure-seeking animals. Therefore, human beings should seek pleasure, should seek happiness, should seek satisfaction. That which maximizes satisfaction, therefore, becomes good. So, if X, then good. Is this clear? So, this is how logic is so essentially associated with ethics. Why is this? Because the only force these principles have is appeal to reason. So, it has to be absolutely, rational, in the sense that it has to appeal to your reason. It cannot be arbitrary. That's the reason why these, the if then, the whole of the logic that you did, and this is connected. In other words, what we are trying to say is, if you want me to believe that the good is X, then you are saying, I know that good is X. That whatever is good is X. That is what I am saying. How do you know? Now comes the problem of justifying. How do you know it? Now, if you are to justify how is it that you know that X is good, then you have to give an argument. You have to give an argument to justify that you know that X is good. And keep in mind, this justification cannot be arbitrary. It has to be objective, and it has to conform to all rational beings. That means your argument has to be valid, and it has to be true. That means it should be a sound argument. And that is what we have seen both utilitarianism as well as Kantian ethics fail. Because the conclusion that we see is not acceptable. It does not appeal to our rational minds. This argument is therefore not acceptable. Therefore, you cannot be a utilitarianist if in the true sense of the term you want to be good, and you cannot be a deontological follower of deontological ethics if you want to know what is good. Because now I'll give you the 3 basic criteria of judging whether an argument is good or not, whether it is sound or not. Apart from the form and the content, you have to see 3 things. 1, clarity. The first condition is that of clarity. That is, you have to first see whether what this theory is telling you, what this argument is telling you is clear or is it not clear. In other words, be careful of ambiguous terms. They can trick you. We have seen that a lot of fallacy can come about if you use terms in various shades of meanings. So you have to see whether this argument or this theory uses terms that you can understand, whether it's absolutely clear. Are they using the term consistently? Okay? Now we saw the problem in utilitarianism is also basically because of this, because then we are not very clear what satisfaction means. So the argument they formulate is basically not clear because we are not sure what satisfaction means. What does it mean by happiness? Now if I ask you just here amongst this handful of 30 people, you will all come up with different views of what is happiness. So this term itself, happiness, that we should maximize happiness itself is not clear. So clarity is very important, 1. 2, it has to cohere, coherence. That is to say that if you use this principle, if you accept X, then by accepting X, you cannot come up with 2 principles or 2 consequences which conflict with one another. If you have an ethical principle, okay, if you have an ethical principle which you want to be accepted, then this ethical principle cannot be of the nature that it gives out 2 further principles which do not cohere. They cannot come together. That is, there is some problem with them coexisting. In other words, they cannot coexist, as is the problem we saw in Kant. Kant is absolutely clear, but he has a problem with coherence. Why? Because on the one hand, lying is bad, and on the other hand, breaking a promise is bad, but in some cases it appears to be good. So then, your principles do not cohere. There is a problem of coherence. Every sound argument should conform to the idea or the principle of coherence. It should first be absolutely clear. Second, it should be, it should have coherence in it. And third, it should have what is technically called as reflective equilibrium. Now this is a technical term, you need not write it. Just understand what it means. It means this, that the principle which comes out of these principles, these criteria, should not be of the nature that it conflicts with my moral intuition, or with what is generally held as good. For example, doing harm to other, or killing someone, or stealing, or lying. Now you should not have an ethical principle which conflicts with this moral intuitions. So you cannot have a principle which tells you, though it may be clear and it may be coherent, but you cannot have a principle which tells you stealing is good, because that does not conform to reflective equilibrium. So these are the 3 things that you should look when you are talking about ethical principles. And I will show you, along with Professor Lobo, okay, in the last 2 sessions, how medical science and the field of bioethics suffers so much from this lack of clarity. And if I would just like you to focus on one thing, I am sure that till now, most of us would not have bothered about the various kinds of if-then that we use when we argue. So now see, to give you a very simple example, if you are arguing if X then Y, and then you forget that your if then is conventional, then you forget that your conclusion is also arbitrary. Then you tend to argue that no, it can't, it has to be. There is nothing it has to be if it is conventional if then. If it is a definitional if then, you can't argue this. For example, what is the definition of an adult? If 18, then an adult. Now, don't take this as a law of nature. If then now is a definitional if then. That means if you change the definition, your conclusion will change. So you have to be very aware about what if then you are using. Conventional. Abortion is legal in these certain circumstances. Given these certain circumstances, abortion is acceptable. Where? In my community. Conventional if then. That means if you move out of that community, your conclusion will not hold. But we tend to forget that there are these natures of if then. We tend to think there's only one if then, and that is the if then of physics. And mind you, most of the time we are not bothered with the physics if then of physics, because we do not deal with such simple level of complexity. Most of the times your researches will be based on a much more higher level of complexity, where the physical if then relation, law of nature, causal relation does not operate. So that basically was why whatever we did is relevant to whatever you all have been doing so far. Now with this, I come to today's theme, okay, and would like you all to focus upon one thing. So far the ethical theories that you have seen, okay, utilitarianism, that is teleological approaches as well as deontological approaches, focus on the act. They tell you which action is good. They don't tell you which person is good. So it is not agent-centered. It is action-centered. In other words, it takes as an assumption that if a person does good acts, then that person is good. So who is a moral person? A person who conforms to moral acts. Right? So basically both utilitarianism, please excuse me for writing short forms, okay, and deontologists, both of them focus on action. But this is not how ethics was. Ethics, when it began in the hands of Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, was primarily an agent-centric theory. So it focused more on the agent rather than the action. So in other words, which action is moral? That action is moral which is performed by a moral agent. It is the other way around. In utilitarianism and deontology, you saw who is a moral person? A person who performs moral actions. Now, that is not how it started. It started the other way around. Which is a moral action? An action performed by a moral man. So the question over there initially was not who is a moral person, what is a moral action? The question was rather, who is a moral person? And there was one answer which was given and which was taken very seriously for hundreds of years, and that answer was given by Aristotle. Aristotle said that person is moral who acts in such a way that he always chooses the means between two extremes. Now, to give you a simple example, if I have a straight line, okay, and this is divided into 5 units, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If I ask you to draw the mean, where will your mean be? The middle, the third one, here, right? Okay. Now Aristotle is telling you something like this. He is telling you how to be a good man. A good man is always a moderate man. He avoids going to extremes. Now to give you a concrete example, Aristotle says, take for example the idea of courage. Courage is a virtue. Okay? Now, but when can you say that a person has courage? That a person is virtuous? When that person acts in accordance to means. That is, courage will always be a mean. Between what? Between two extremes. One is cowardice, that is you are shit scared. You don't want to do anything. In modern days terminology, you chicken out of all situations. Right? or you are rash. You don't think. You just take out the gun and shoot. That is also not courageous. That is going to one extreme. And the other extreme is chickening out. Anybody comes, slaps you, you're fine. Though, and it's not that you are tolerant. You would like to bash him up. But you simply can't. You can't gather that courage to bash him up. So you just stay there. Please keep this in mind. This is not Gandhigiri. Right? It is not Gandhigiri, because Gandhigiri, that is something that I just want to make clear in few seconds. For Gandhigiri, your intention must also not be there. You should not intend to hit him back. That's the point. It's not simply giving the other cheek and saying, please slap me here. Though you want to hit him, this want to hit him should be totally absent in Gandhigiri. Okay, so that's the difference between Gandhigiri and chickening out. So Aristotle is telling you to be courageous, you have to always take the means, be moderate. But the problem was, in mathematics this is okay, because I can graduate 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, third one is the mean, so draw it here. So in other words, in mathematics, in this example that I gave you, the mean is a mean pertaining to the object. So it is an object-centered mean. So no matter who comes from this group, if I tell you, please draw the mean, you will draw the mean here. Why? Because you are drawing the mean in relation to the object that is given. But Aristotle is not telling you that. Aristotle goes a step ahead and says, this mean is to be drawn keeping in mind two things. One, the individual who is drawing it, the agent who is drawing it, and the situation in which the agent is drawing it. So sometimes it would mean that given the same situation, a gentleman can draw the mean here, and another gentleman could draw the mean here. And both would be means. Or the same gentleman can draw a mean here sometime and a mean here sometime in different situations. Now what is the problem with this? What is the problem with this? Exactly, it becomes arbitrary then. And to avoid this, what happened? Here came the deontologists and the utilitarianism, removing the agent, basing it totally on action, because once you base it on action, it becomes object-centric. Then the agent is nowhere in the scene. The agent is defined in terms of the action. Right? And action is objective. So now you can try to remove this arbitrariness that has crept in ethics. That's the whole reason why the shift took place. Please keep in mind, Aristotle was the first person to give the theory. He preceded utilitarianism. But the reason why it could not go further is because of this reason. So you see how important is universalizability to ethics. How important it is to appeal to a rational individual, no matter where, when, it has to appeal to a rational individual. That's the whole point of ethics. Is this clear? This, in other words, the Aristotelian ethics is what is called as virtue ethics. What is virtue ethics? It's a theory which tells you that to do a moral action, to do a morally good action, you first have to be a morally good man. How to be a morally good man? Well, always act on the means. Whose mean? Your mean. Very convenient in some sense of the term. Right? So my mean is my mean and your mean is your mean. And both can be moral. So that was the problem. Of course, if you read his Nicomachean Ethics and Eudaimonian Ethics, which are huge books, a collection of 10 books, you will find that he gives a lot of elaborate discussions on this, but in essence, this is what he's trying to tell you. That is why the shift had to be made to utilitarianism and deontological ethics. Why? Because you want to claim, I know. You don't want to say, I believe. And if you want to say, I know this is moral, then it has to be objectively justifiable, which is not possible in the case of Aristotle. Because the mean is subjective. The subject is drawing it. It is not objective, so it can't be objective at all. Is this clear? However, with the failure of all ethical theories, as can be seen, as you have seen in the preceding sessions of Professor Lobo, that neither utilitarianism can answer your difficulties, nor can deontological theories answer your difficulties. So there came about a skeptical movement. People started doubting whether this is possible at all. Therefore, in the 20th century, there was a gradual shift, and people began to sort of argue, maybe ethics is not a question of I know. Maybe ethics is a question of I believe. And to support this theory, they came up with what is called as emotivism. Now, please look at the steps. In order to say I believe, that ethics is a case of I believe, not a case of I know, what you are in fact doing is taking ethics out of the domain of reason, because as long as it is associated with reason, it can't be arbitrary. It will always be universal. So to bring it down to the level of I believe, you will have to remove ethics from the domain of reason. And that is exactly what the emotivists did in the 20th century. They said that ethical principles are nothing more but expressions of emotions. It's just like saying, I love you. It's just an emotion. So when I say stealing is bad, I am doing nothing more than expressing my emotion. Nothing rational, just an emotion. So therefore the term emotivism. Now how far you can accord with it, I don't know. But people have a lot of problems. Emotivism, plus there is a branch called prescriptivism, which is an offshoot of emotivism, which says, see, just saying it is an emotion is not good, man. We have removed it from reason, but at least let us give it some status. So what do? You say it is, of course, an expression of emotion, but it is also prescriptive in nature, in the sense that I am telling you, I love you, you must also love me. So in other words, if I say stealing is bad, I am expressing an emotion, but I want you to accept the same and express the same emotion. So I am trying to prescribe my emotion to you. That is prescriptivism. Comes out from the same group. Right? So the basic step of the 20th century philosophy was to remove ethics from reason and place it in belief. So one way is to say it is an emotion. Now see, if this is an ethical theory, it does not fulfill this criteria. The reflective equilibrium is gone. Because my reflective equilibrium tells me that morality cannot just be a case of emotions. It has to be something more than that. It simply can't be an expression of emotion. So it fails this test. Now there is another move in the 20th century was even devastating. And that move is called cultural ethical relativism. Now please keep one thing in mind. This is a very appealing theory. It appeals instantly. What does it say? It bases itself basically, to sum it up, into two basic principles. One, ethical principles are dependent upon the culture of the individual. Or instead of culture, you can say the community of the individual. And secondly, it says, therefore, you cannot judge the moral principles of one community through the standards of some other community. In other words, what am I trying to say? We are trying to say this. Supposing somebody plays football, and he is a great football fan. He is in the football community. And he is made to watch a game of cricket. And this fellow says, what is this game, man? There are no goal posts. Is this a valid argument? He will say, you can't criticize. I mean, that's cricket, man. They don't have football posts and goalies. Now, this is not the kind of criticism that you can do. Why? Because you are criticizing cricket from the field of football. If criticism is to be there, you have to criticize cricket from within cricket. So that's basically what the second principle of cultural ethical relativism says. That you cannot, under any circumstance, judge, criticize, or produce a critique of the moral principles of some other culture from without that culture. Therefore, according to the cultural ethical relativist, there cannot be any universal moral principles until and unless we are all willing to adopt Rabindranath Tagore's universal culture. All of us belong to the same culture. Until and unless that does not happen, you cannot have universal truths of ethical principles. So all ethical principles become dependent on the culture that you come from, the community that you come from. Okay? So this is the first implication of cultural ethical relativism. Secondly, with the help of its second principle, saying that you cannot judge a culture from without that culture, it brings about a kind of non-translatability between cultures. So a person of one culture now can't communicate with the other person of some other culture. Why? It's like, how can a football player with the rules of football come and play cricket? You can't play cricket with the rules of football. So basically, translation does not become possible. In other words, if that community person comes to you and says that is ethical, he will not be saying anything to you. Because you are not in that culture, you will not understand what it means. Because you can understand only within your culture and he can understand only within his culture. Now, if that is so, then cultural ethical relativists, unfortunately, club human beings like numbers. So minus numbers can't come this side. Positive numbers have to stay on this side only. Complex numbers, they have a different class and they don't interact. Now, is this how human beings are empirically? In other words, we cannot accept cultural ethical relativism because it first of all fails the clarity test. Because if you are to say that morals are relative to culture, then you will have to first specify what is a culture. And please try and do that. And you will see that you will never reach, I mean, there are people, historians who have been trying to define culture, and now they have entered into distinction between culture and civilization, culture and community, and now how do you define? Because until and unless you do not define for us what is a culture, we don't know. So it's absolutely unclear. 2, it fails the coherence test. Now there is no question of coherence. Because the culture changes, some contradictory principle may be adopted. Coherence fails. And even it fails the reflective equilibrium test. Because somewhere deep inside, you do not feel that morality can be so simple, that you take a train, cross the border, and it becomes moral. Right? So it fails all the 3 tests, though it appeals very much to all of us. Okay? Now, this in brief is what is cultural ethical relativism. See, what are they all trying to do? They are trying to justify what is good. This is one way of justifying it. Right? The other way of justifying it, which was common during the medieval time, was what is called as the DC theory. Divine command theory. What is good? That is good which is commanded by the divine. Very simple way of coming out of it. Objectively justified. You are not saying it is subject to me, therefore it's good. You are saying it is good because it has been commanded by the divine. Okay? Yes, you have already started philosophizing now. Who is the divine? Right? So, basically, for the time being, let us equate the divine with God. So basically it means that what is good is that which is commanded by God. So in other words, if we are to put it in an if-then formula, then it will be if commanded by God, then good. Right? Now the problem is, to put it for you very logically, the problem is what nature of if-then is this? Is it logical or is it definitional? And this is a very interesting problem. Yeah, no, but God can't have a convention. So God has to define what is good. So there is a Platonic dialogue called Euthyphro. And mind you, this dialogue comes in somewhere in between 350 BC. So it's come that old. And this dialogue gives you a very beautiful instantiation or formulation of this problem. Now the problem is this. There can only be 2 possibilities of considering divine command theory in the nature of if then, either it is logical, one, right, or two, it is definitional. Now if it is definitional, then God is very arbitrary. It is good just because he has defined it or she has defined it. So tomorrow if God changes the definition, what will happen? Right? Are you getting the point? The point is this: God has commanded, stealing is bad. So what is bad? Stealing. Why? Because it is commanded by God. If commanded by God, then it is right. So stealing is bad is right. Why? Because it is commanded by God. Now you have to ask for the justification. Why is it commanded by God? What is the nature of this if then? Then one answer is it is definition, because God just said it. But why did God say it? Just like that. He felt like saying it, so he said it. So in 2030 he might come and say, okay, from today new commandments. Stealing is good. Killing is good. Will you accept it?
They may, we may not.
No, see, it is for all. See, that is what I want. It pinches you. Like he said, they may, I may not, but I will not. Which means it fails the relative equilibrium test. Now the other way to safeguard God, the divine command theory rather, is to say that it is not definitional, it is logical. That means that it has come out of reason. It is a rational choice. God had reasons for doing it. Now if that is so, then those reasons become more important than God. So even God needs a principle to decide what is good. So why do you need God? Just get hold of the principle, right? In this case, the divine commandment theory fails the coherence test. God is absolutely essential for morality. God is not essential for morality. Now more problematic, but a bit drifted apart from this theory, is the idea that for this theory to be accepted, you must first accept the most problematic thing: existence of God. So if you are to prove this and only then it is this, then it becomes a problem. But even if you grant it, that no, God exists, irrespective of that, you will fall into this problem. God is essential, God is not essential, or you will have to say God is essential and arbitrary. He just does what he pleases. Now here is where I will end everything just by telling you that you have to make, I request you to make a distinction. This is a humble request, that you make the distinction between theories and doctrines. Theories on the one hand and doctrines on the other hand. Okay? Theories and doctrines. Basically, theories always have the structure, as I told you. They always have arguments, and they are always justified, or at least they try to justify themselves. Doctrines, on the other hand, are simple prescriptions, commands which are given to you, which you have to believe. You have to believe. Don't ask over there, how did you know? In doctrines, you can't ask this question. It is an illegitimate question. In a doctrine, it is an illegitimate question to ask, how did you know? You have to believe that it is so. In other words, the divine command theory, instead of being an ethical theory, moves towards being a doctrine. Now, there is a whole section on Indian philosophy, which time has not permitted me to speak on, but I'll just tell you that this distinction holds there. This distinction holds there. Now, you all may have now enough exposure to yoga, right? So, the kind of principles that are outlined there, meaning you can't simply ask, meaning it will be illegitimate for you. You can't ask Buddha, how did Buddha know that there is Nibbana, or what you generally call Nirvana? How did Buddha know that? You can't ask this question. It is an illegitimate question, because that is a doctrination. That is a doctrine, it is a code. You want to believe it. This is even what Buddha says. See, I am no expert in Indian philosophy except Buddhism. Okay? And in Buddhism, Buddha explicitly states that there is Nibbana, I have known. You want to know it, you have to do it. I can't justify for you. In fact, there is this very beautiful story, and I will end it with that. There is a king who goes to Buddha and says, if you can justify to me that there is Nibbana, I am going to follow your path and I am going to give up all my kingdom, all my riches, everything. I'll just distribute it amongst the poor and I'll become a monk. So Buddha says, really? And this gentleman says, of course. But you have to prove to me. In other words, he is thinking of a theory. He's looking for a justification. He wants Buddha to justify there is Nibbana. Right? Buddha says, fine. I'll do it, but for that, for 2 years you have to keep quiet and sit beside me. That's the deal. If you can sit for 2 years quietly beside me, then I'll give you the justification that there is Nibbana. And his favorite disciple, Ananda, starts laughing. And he's laughing uncontrollably. So this king gets irritated. He says, why the fool are you laughing, man? We're discussing such a serious issue. It's about giving up a kingdom. And you are laughing. And this Ananda says, don't get tricked. This Buddha tricks us all the time. I came with the same thing and he made me sit quietly for 2 years. At the end of 2 years, I came to realize that no justification is required. Because you experience it yourself. So 2 years is all that is required. And this fellow is trying to trap you right now. In other words, there are modes of justification in Indian philosophy which cannot be accommodated within the framework of a theory. Right? It cannot be accommodated with the framework of a theory. I'm sorry, I cannot speak more on the Indian philosophical section because of the constraint of time. Buddhism, Jainism, like Buddhism is very simple, tells you there are 4 noble truths. Existence is suffering, first thing. So if you exist, you will suffer. But desire is the root cause of all suffering. And you exist because you desire. And since you exist, you will suffer. But there is a way of dukkha nirodha. There is a way to stop this suffering. And that way is very simple. Follow the Ashtamagga. Follow the Eightfold Path. And you will see that there will be no suffering. You know, so these are if you ask Buddha to justify it, which if then is it? Buddha will simply tell you, sit quietly for 2 years. And then you will see. I'm not telling you, please do not keep in mind, please keep in mind that I am not trying to tell you that they are false, they are wrong. I'm not trying to tell you that. I'm just trying to tell you that it becomes very difficult to formulate them as theories. So it is best to keep this distinction between doctrines on the one hand and theories on the other. What you have done so far are all theories. And you have seen that none of the theories confirm or give you answers to what is ethical. Right? So now you go back and start thinking, how come there are codes of ethics? Thank you very much.